Another key thrust of the budget is climate change and the green transformation of the economy, but there's a pretty big cloud hanging over the government's credibility with environmentalists over the approval of the Bay du Nord offshore oil project east of Newfoundland and Labrador, coming just days after the government laid out its plan for cutting emissions, including in the oil and gas sector in this country. Julia Levin's the Climate and Energy Program Manager at Environmental Defence Canada. Julia, thanks for taking time to speak with me tonight. What's your appraisal of this budget and what it promises to do to deal with the climate and the environment?
I'd say this is another failure of leadership when it comes to doing what it takes for the climate crisis, coming off of a long week of failures. So the key question is, are we spending what it takes? Are we investing in the proven solutions that the IPCC has told us will allow us to have emissions this decade? And we're not. We're just, the scale of spending in this budget is so falls short of what's needed. And on the flip side, there's enormous new fossil fuel subsidies in this budget. So basically, instead of investing in a safe future, we're doubling down on the very companies fueling the climate crisis.
How much money do you think needed to be spent if the government, in your view, was being serious about the climate?
Prominent economist Nicholas Stark has said that countries should be spending around 2% of their GDP on the climate crisis. So that's around $40 billion. That would have been a huge ramp up from where spending is now, but that's the kind of level that we're talking about. And of course, these are investments in our future. These are investments that make our homes better to live in, that give us cleaner air. These are investments that pay off. Instead, we see a tiny fraction of that and spread out over many years.
One of the key measures is this $15 billion Canada Growth Fund, supposed to be attracting private investment to help develop projects to reduce emissions and support and develop low-carbon industries. What do you think of that approach?
I have reservations. What we see when we have funding programs that are set up like this, and we have the Net Zero Accelerator, that's an $8 billion funding program that was set up last year, they lack climate conditions. So in actuality, what we're seeing is these programs give a whole bunch of money in fossil fuel subsidies to oil and gas companies. They're not actually aligned with the kinds of solutions that we need to be investing in. And similarly, one of my biggest concerns with this budget is that Minister Freeland ignored what 400 scientists across this country have said, what 30,000 Canadians asked for, and that was that she not go ahead with a new tax credit for carbon capture and storage. And instead, she put in a 50% tax credit. It's going to be a giant amount of our taxpayer dollars that goes towards something that isn't a climate solution.
Right. Sorry, it could be up to 60% in the early days in some cases. But look, these carbon capture tax credits, it's part, as you say, of the Liberal emissions reduction plan. It's in the budget. Carbon capture technology and pursuing it was supported by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in their latest report. You oppose those investments in carbon capture technology. How come?
Just to clarify what the IPCC actually said. There's sometimes conflation between technologies that actually remove carbon from the atmosphere, that's called carbon dioxide removal, CDR, and carbon capture and storage. This doesn't remove carbon. So the IPCC actually said that carbon capture and storage is the least effective, most expensive way to reduce emissions, and the government shouldn't rely on it. And instead, Canada's doing exactly that. They're ignoring what the scientists are saying, and they're banking on a speculative technology to deliver huge emissions reductions. But carbon capture and storage has never been about climate solutions. It's actually been a way for oil and gas companies to access cheap carbon for more oil production. And that's what we're doing. We're subsidizing more production. Carbon capture and storage puts more carbon into the atmosphere than what it takes out.
Let's finish on this. What's your reaction to the approval of the Bay du Nord project? It's got 137 conditions, including that it must be zero emission by 2050. How does this factor into the conversation about the government's approach to climate?
The decision to approve the project was a slap in the face to the world's climate scientists and to communities across the world whose lives are on the line. It was an incredibly irresponsible decision, and I'll remind Canadians of the words of the UN Secretary General Guterres, who said investments in new fossil fuel projects are moral and economic madness. And he called countries that are continuing to produce new fossil fuels the truly dangerous radicals. Those are very strong words from the UN Secretary General. that apply to Canada in this context.
All right, Julia Levin from Environmental Defence Canada. Thanks for your perspective tonight. Do appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you so much.